Hello, I'm Dan Ellsberg, and I want to welcome here tonight John Shipton and Gabriel Shipton, the father and brother of Julian Assange. I'm hoping they will visit me in my home when they come to the Bay Area here before long on this um, journey of fundraising for a defense that I am very supportive of. Julian Assange, who is facing the same charges that I did 50 years ago this month. I was the first to be prosecuted under the Espionage Act for giving information to the American public in order actually to reveal war crimes, crimes against peace, deceptions of the public, as Julian did in 2010, giving information from Chelsea Manning, then Bradley Manning. And 50 years ago this month, actually, the Solicitor General of the United States, Erwin Griswold, former dean of Harvard Law School, was arguing to the Supreme Court that any further revelation of the information that I had given, which was top secret, marked top secret, sensitive, I had given to the New York Times would cause irreparable, irreversible damage, immediate harm to the national security of the United States. That was nonsense. And indeed, in the 50 years since then, not one single sentence has been shown to have been properly classified at that point. It was all 3 years old, or in some cases, decades longer than that. And as Griswold himself admitted decades later, he had never felt there was any harm to the United States from this. In fact, he said, I don't know anyone who ever thought so. It's an odd thing for him to say because he had been the one telling the Supreme Court that in fact it was causing immediate irreparable harm. Now, I was then prosecuted after the Supreme Court denied the injunction that Griswold was after on 12 felony counts, totaling a possible sentence of 115 years. Julian is facing 175. It's inflation over time here. But essentially the same charges that I faced exactly and as wrongly based, as unconstitutional as in my own case. I say that because 50 years of research into that particular law, for which I was the first to be prosecuted for leaking, has made me aware that the use of the Espionage Act, not against spies, but against someone who's given information to the American public, either a leaker or a whistleblower, is clearly a violation of the First Amendment, freedom of the press, and freedom of speech. In Julian's case, the prosecution is of a publisher like the New York Times, with whom he shared information, in fact, along with other newspapers. They haven't yet been indicted, but Julian has. So he's the first case of a publisher being indicted, whereas I was the first case of a source being indicted. And now although my case was dismissed for governmental crimes against me, almost 24 people have been indicted since as sources. And yet the Supreme Court has never yet addressed the question of the constitutionality of those prosecutions. They haven't been taken by the Supreme Court. If Julian Assange is extradited and prosecuted here, he will probably be convicted at the lower level. And yet, for a number of reasons, that case, he should be not extradited. He should be free with his partner and 2 children right now. And I'll mention 3 reasons for that right now. First of all, he will not be able to explain to a jury why he did what he did as a publisher, any more than any of the sources, starting with me, were able to tell the jury, because that's not allowed under the Espionage Act. Motivation, intention, impact are irrelevant to the case, as my prosecutor told the judge. And that's been true in every other. Obviously, that cannot be a fair trial for a whistleblower. So Ed Snowden could not get a fair trial here, and Julian Assange could not get a fair trial. Second, the use of the Espionage Act as if it were a British-type Official Secrets Act, criminalizing any and all release to the public of information that some government official has stamped secret, almost always because it's potentially embarrassing to the government, not to keep it from an enemy or a rival power. That's not to say that there are no legitimate secrets. It is to say that about 5% have been estimated of the current classified information qualifies for classification even at the time that it is stamped. And a few years later, almost none of it is, perhaps a tenth of that, as Griswold later admitted. So, in short, Julian, again, like all these others, has been indicted with an application of a law that is clearly unconstitutional in the light of our First Amendment, which Britain doesn't have and most countries don't have. But here he is as a non-American, trying to bring him back here to prosecute him in a country where that prosecution for being a publisher of information is clearly a violation of our First Amendment freedom of the press. Finally, in his particular case, it's been testified under oath in Spanish courts and referred to in his extradition hearings. He was subject to the same criminal activities that I was during my trial: warrantless wiretapping, total surveillance of his conversations, even with his lawyers and his doctors. That goes beyond what I experienced, except that in my case, actually, the president sent people to burglarize my former psychoanalyst office, similar again to their interest in his doctor's relations, information they wanted to get to manipulate me into silence or to blackmail me. And finally, there were discussions of poisoning him or kidnapping him. In my own case, a key aspect in the charges being dropped was that a dozen CIA assets had been brought up from Miami to Washington on May 3rd, 1972, to incapacitate Daniel Ellsberg totally. Well, all of this added up to what my judge at the time called a totality of circumstances that constituted, he called it a bizarre, and clearly a process here which offends a sense of justice. Every aspect of the prosecution of Julian Assange offends a sense of justice, above all in this country, but really in any country in the world. And if he is successfully extradited against the decision of the British judge on appeal here by the Trump administration and now the Biden administration, appeal against that decision of the British judge in an attempt to extradite him. If he is extradited, prosecuted, and convicted, it will be the first instance of a journalist, not just a source like me, but a journalist being prosecuted for truthful revelation of information. The First Amendment of our Constitution, the foundation of our democracy and our republic, will have been effectively rescinded. So it's of interest, above all, to journalists in the United States, but really to journalists throughout the world, for whom this would be a terrible precedent and would be imitated all over the world by countries that otherwise regard themselves as democracies. It's in the interest of our democracy and of journalism to assure that the cause for which John Shipton and Gabriel Shipton are engaged in right now should prevail.